Speaking of whiplash, I'm getting a sore neck getting whiplashed by the Supreme Court of the United States. They can't get their act together. They're internally inconsistent when it comes to immigration, removal, and due process rights. And now we've got a situation where they blocked not once but twice a federal judge just doing his job up in Massachusetts, Judge Murphy, to try to save 8 people from being tortured or worse in countries like South Sudan and Libya, where Donald Trump wants to remove them to, not because they're South Sudanese or Lebanese, or from Libya, sorry, Lebanon, but because those are the countries that are willing to take Donald Trump's money to allow him to dump human beings into their jails and immigration system. And Murphy steps in and blocks the Trump administration from doing that without due process. It gets unblocked by the United States Supreme Court. It gets reblocked by the United States Supreme Court. And yet there's still activity going on in Maryland and up in Massachusetts about this very issue. Confused you won't be after you watch this segment of Legal AF, the podcast. Let's take a look.
I want to talk about this Supreme Court ruling regarding the 8 migrants who were kind of in this holding area in Djibouti, and they were going to be sent to a concentration camp in South Sudan, which is kind of like the SCOTUS in El Salvador, but in South Sudan, this war-torn area, one of the most dangerous and violent places in the world. The Trump regime saying, let's do a concentration camp there with the local officials there, and that's where we're going to send migrants as part of third country deportation. So we talked about there's this judge in Massachusetts, federal Judge Murphy, and Judge Murphy had issued an injunction blocking the Trump regime from bringing the people from Djibouti bring the people from the United States to South Sudan without justifying that the process that they're supposed to go through was actually followed. You know, Judge Murphy's order was actually narrower than I guess the headlines were. Judge Murphy, and I agree with Judge Murphy here in the sense of this, deportations to third countries is indeed allowed, but you have to follow a process because it might violate not just laws here in the United States, but international law against human torture if you're taking human beings and you're putting them in war-torn countries. And so the idea is that if someone is, one, allowed to be deported, if you go through the steps of deportation, then the question is where. And if they can't be sent for whatever reason back to their home country for lots of reasons, then the next step is, yes, you can transfer them to other countries that they weren't born in or have no affiliation with, but you have to justify it. You have to explain why this country. Are they going to be safe in this country? Could they die in this country? Is this country able to accept them? And if you can go through those process through our immigration system, this has always been the case. Because, you know, you're allowed to do it. This idea, though, of putting people in South Sudan and CCOT, that's not what it was really ever intended to be used for. So all Judge Murphy said was, wow, you've all of a sudden shipped these 8 people to South Sudan when their lawyers came in and said, whoa, they're going to die in South Sudan. Then there was efforts to try to, stop that and say, whoa, have they gone through the process? So all Judge Murphy did is said, follow the normal process before you send people to third countries. Then the Supreme Court, this was a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, we covered it here. They then issued an order on their shadow docket staying or pausing Judge Murphy's order. And so when you stayed an order, which stayed or blocked sending people to South Sudan, what that means is Trump can send people to South Sudan. And the Supreme Court was they didn't really provide any explanation, but they've always been saying that Trump and his regime will suffer irreparable harm if their executive orders and their actions as the executive branch are not followed. And then it got kicked back to Judge Murphy after the Supreme Court basically said, we're staying your order. And Judge Murphy had issued 2 orders on two different dates. So then Judge Murphy said, okay, well, your stay was just of my original order, not my second order, which clarified my first order. And the second order was basically, can you justify the process that you're using before you send people to South Sudan. So go through the actual process. My first order was the injunction blocking them from going to South Sudan. And then the Trump regime ran right back to the Supreme Court and said, whoa, Judge Murphy is saying that your order didn't address his second order. So he's still allowing these people in Djibouti to stay in Djibouti. We want them to South Sudan. So we want clarification, Supreme Court. Say that all of Judge Murphy's orders are subject to your main orders, Supreme Court. And let's get these people to South Sudan immediately so they can die. It's basically what the Trump regime said. So it went to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court immediately, instantly. It's like a text. It's like Trump has text message service now with the right-wing Supreme Court. They get it. There's no briefing. There's no oral argument. The Supreme Court gets it. They're like, oh, absolutely, we're granting this for Trump. Send him to South Sudan. Basically what the Supreme Court did. There was a scathing dissent from Justice Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson. And here's what they say. In a democracy, power implies responsibility. The greater the power that defies law, the less tolerant can this court be of defiance. As the nation's ultimate judicial tribunal, this court, beyond any other organ of society, is the trustee of law and charged with the duty of securing obedience to it. This court continues to invert those principles. Today's order clarifies only one thing. Other litigants must follow the rules, but the administration has the Supreme Court on speed dial. Respectively, I dissent. Popok, that was, that statement. You are inverting what your job is. Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson are saying, yeah, basically, the majority, you right-wing majority, you are the criminals. You are the ones committing crimes against humanity right now. And you have Trump on speed dial. Anytime he wants to commit crimes against humanity, you take it, and then you take his call, and then you grant him whatever he wants to do to allow his authoritarian machinations to be instantly implemented before there's even proceedings and a trial. All anybody was saying here, all Judge Murphy was saying here was, whoa, before we send these 8 people to die in South Sudan, let's just go through a process. That's all. So pause it. If ultimately Trump regime, you're right, they should go there, fine. Just go through the process. To which Trump goes, oh my God, a process causes me irreparable harm. That goes back, Popok, to what we were also talking about in the first segment, due process. All we're saying is, I'm not and you're not defending Abrego. I'm not defending these 8 people in Djibouti who are now going to South Sudan. All I'm defending is let them have their process. If ultimately you find they should go to South Sudan or Abrego, fine, that's the ruling. But what are we doing here when Trump just says it and then you issue a stay of federal court orders that are just pausing it, not because they're finding in favor of the migrants, they're finding in favor of due process, and the Supreme Court keeps overruling that. Popok.
I mean, the American people should be concerned and upset that they now reside in a country where the Supreme Court allows somebody's constitutional rights to due process and notice, that's all we're talking about, to be run roughshod over by a president that, or as so succinctly and pithy put by Ketanji Brown Jackson, a president who lives in a law-free zone. That's not okay. And as I've said, same way that you've said it during my hot takes, I'm not Abrego Garcia's defense lawyer. I don't know what these 8 people in the Djibouti Air Force Base have done other than what's in the record. I'm not here to defend them. I'm here to defend with my last dying breath the process, just as you and I will defend until, we're hoarse and or dead, First Amendment rights of people to speak about things in the public square that we find uncomfortable because we find them to be uncomfortable. And that used to be democracy. And that used to be the brand of democracy that we all could be proud of one way or the other. But now you have, and I just did a hot take with Leah Littman from, who's become a semi-regular now, with her strict scrutiny, a law professor at Michigan. And Leah and I talked about the power of the dissents that are being written. We talk about opposition. We talk about resistance here because we all vibrate on the same frequency on Legal AF and on Midas Touch in our audience and on both sides of the camera. I asked her about the power of dissents and why they're important. The ones we see written by Ketanji Brown Jackson, the ones we see written by Sonia Sotomayor, a little bit by Kagan, but really by those two. And why do they matter? And you and I learned a lot in law school from dissents that eventually became the majority opinion, because dissents also influence public opinion, and dissents influence students, law students, and people, and give them hope. And they are speaking to history. I mean, we have a playlist on Legal AF called Court of History, led by Sidney Blumenthal and Sean Wilentz. And because the highest court is not the Supreme Court, it's how history is going to judge the lawyers, the judges, the Supreme Court, and us as citizens. There's no higher title in America, nor it should be that way, than citizen. And to watch this destruction and have Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sotomayor call it out, and call out, as Sotomayor did, that you touched on, the abuse of power, her words, the abuse of the inherent authority of the United States Supreme Court's MAGA right-wing majority to benefit, to bend over backwards, to find irreparable harm because it touches on Article 2 powers of the president, and not care a whit about human beings and their suffering and their lack of due process. Now, some people, I just did a hot take on it for Legal AF side. Some people might think, well, at the end of the day, after 72 hours, Trump got what he wanted because he ran back to court. Just to give the timeline again, he gets a one paragraph ruling by the 6-3 majority that says, Murphy, your order keeping those 8 people in the Djibouti Air Force Base while due process and notice is being evaluated, we're blocking it. We're going to let the First Circuit do its thing on appeal, but we're okay with the president exercising his power to send people to third world countries that don't share our values as a dumping ground. So, and that's where we got the Sotomayor dissent, which was 12, 14 pages in length. Then Murphy gets everybody together, as you pointed out, and says, well, I had 2 orders. One was in April, and that was blocked. And, you went into your shadow docket. You didn't wait for a final decision by me. You didn't wait. You did this not only interlocutory earlier than a final judgment, but you did it on one of my orders. There was another order in May where I said, you violated my order in April, and I think you may be in contempt. And I made another order, and you didn't block that. And Sotomayor actually signaled to Murphy, she said, not all remedial orders have been blocked. And right on cue, he pulled everybody together the Monday after the Friday of the order and said, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. They are not to move. I'm still evaluating. I'm still getting to the bottom of it. And they ran back to court with this whiny motion for clarification. But as you said, it's like they have a WhatsApp direct line or text messaging to the Supreme Court, like, bring it back. Now, I had hoped that the window had closed. I did a report on this because they left for the term ended and they hadn't ruled on it. It had been several days. Then, of course, lo and behold, 4 days ago, they issue a 1-paragraph unsigned decision that, motion to clarify. We're nothing Murphy, none of his rulings, they're all being blocked. None of them go forward. And so they got a win there. So we're like, oh crap, those guys are going they're going to South Sudan. The lawyers, this is like last minute reprieve for somebody on death row, right? You're trying all the locks, all the doors. So they run to Judge Randy Moss in DC, and bring what they claim to be a new petition on new evidence. He looks at it and says, I'm going to block it for a day, but I'm transferring it back to Judge Murphy. So he laterals it back to Murphy. In the meantime, he has another stay order. So it's like the governor reprieve. Okay, all right. And then Murphy gets it back and says, look, let's have a hearing. And what I think he accomplished at the hearing, although most people, including myself, don't think it's worth the paper it's written on, is a concession by the Department of Justice that they've spoken to the State Department, and the State Department has informed them that these people are not going to be detained, that they're going to be temporarily released and go through a naturalization process in South Sudan. Let me remind everybody, or say it out loud for people who don't know, These people are not from South Sudan. That's the point. It's a third country, not their country of origin, or nor one that they wanted to go to or would agree to go to. This is a whole nother thing. This is like an El Salvadoran person, Mexican person, whatever, beings or denaturalized U.S. citizen, God help us, being sent to think about this, South Sudan, okay, and dumped there, and with no passport. What's their passport? They lost their passport from another country. Now they're going to go through a naturalization process in the middle of a war-torn South Sudan. And does anybody really believe that when the Trump administration, DOJ, told Murphy that when he said, look, what we don't want to be is dumping people off in foreign lands where they get tortured and we act like it didn't happen. And that we can't be in that world. And that's when the lawyer made all sorts of representations, but it's not in writing. And you see this Supreme Court, as we've watched the evolution since April of this court. First few orders came out, we were like, okay, we sort of figure it out. They're not going to go as far as to violate due process, habeas corpus rights, or notice when it comes to deportation or removal. Got it. And another couple of orders came out. We're like, okay, I sort of understand that. And then this came out of nowhere, which is no, these people have no rights. We don't care. Dump them off. And we're like, really? That's the pronouncement of the United States Supreme Court, and that Article 2 power is preeminent about everything? And the problem, I'll just leave it on this, Ben. The problem with all of that, it's not about 8 guys in the Djibouti Air Force Base. It's about the precedent and the body of law that's being developed by an emboldened Supreme Court led by Roberts and the rest. Now they have the numbers and have had it for a number of years, and how they're shoving this anti-democratic, anti-American way of life down our throat. I'll give one last example that you and I will keep an eye on. This is so bad that even my baby daughter is crying in the distance in the background. But in Texas, we've got a couple of guys that are trying out for the United States Supreme Court. One of them is Judge Ho, the other one is Judge Oldham. They held last week an oral argument that was sent back to them by the United States Supreme Court on immigration and removal issues related to the Alien Enemies Act. And when you hear the language, because they've been empowered by the Supreme Court, Oldham said in his oral argument, well, we have an armed invasion of Venezuela by Tren de Aragua that's been in this country, and MS-13 has been in this country for a dozen years. We've got an armed invasion. Who are we to disagree with the president's determination under the Alien Enemies Act? We're like, oh, here we go. So this kind of ruling, and judges like Murphy willing to stand up for it, is important. But we are watching. We now know better where the Supreme Court's going to go when it comes to Alien Enemies Act and where it comes to removal and deportation. A very narrow box of habeas corpus and due process and removal rights, only under certain statutes related to it. And if it's an emergency or it's a war or a predatory incursion, all bets are going to be off, and the power of the presidency reigns supreme. And that is not only inconsistent with hundreds of years of precedent, but it just shows you, as Judge Ludick, who's just been on our Legal AF channel in the last couple of days, said, this is about a Supreme Court that is bending over backwards, not just to reinforce the power of the imperial presidency. It's about benefiting a guy named Donald Trump. And we should all be concerned about that, regardless of which side of the aisle or no aisle that you're on.
So our Legal AF audience would probably say, because I know them very well, guys, but why aren't you showing me the Supreme Court ruling? Like you talked about the dissent, you showed us Sotomayor, which we appreciate, but why aren't you showing me the rulings or playing the oral arguments? You guys always do that. So are you hiding something from me? No, actually the Supreme Court is, because as Popok said, this massive precedent is being set that's overturning our entire conception of the Constitution as we've known it. And the Supreme Court is not holding any oral arguments on these cases. The parties are not showing up and arguing these issues in front of the court. They're not submitting long briefs. You know how we talk about those amicus briefs, which are like friends of the court briefs, where people talk about different groups, give their opinions, and then the Supreme Court sets these things like a year out or 6 months out or 3 months out and all of those types of things. That's not happening. The Supreme Court is using what's called a shadow docket because it's not happening in the sunlight. That's why it's been kind of nicknamed the shadow docket. And they're making these rulings using procedural language that have the substantive impact of endorsing Trump's authoritarianism. So the Supreme Court isn't saying that we feel that Donald Trump violates the Constitution or that the Constitution supports what Trump is doing. They're not going there. What they're saying in all of these rulings is we're not going to even write an opinion. We're not going to have oral argument. What we're just going to do is we're going to say we've agreed to stay or pause the district court's ruling so ordered. And by pausing the district court's ruling, and the district court's cases, they have hearings, they have submissions. The district court has oral argument, has the people argue and submit evidence. And that's why these district courts, whether you're Trump appointed or Obama appointed or Biden appointed or Bush or Reagan, they're finding against Donald Trump after the evidence is provided. They're not just doing it. They're going through process. And they're saying, wait a minute, Trump, you're not showing us evidence. So we have to weigh and balance these things. So we're ruling against you. But then the Supreme Court goes in and basically says, whoa, to what Popok said. We're dealing with Article 2 of the Constitution. That's the executive branch. If the executive branch says to us that the district court's orders are causing them irreparable harm, we as the judiciary, as Article 3, we have to step in for Article 2, the executive. And what we're going to do is we're going to pause the district court's order. So it's this kind of cowardly move the Supreme Court's doing by not issuing the order so we could dissect it and say, oh, here's how they feel about these issues. Here's how they balance the evidence. They're not doing it. And then the Supreme Court, so cowardly, they're hiding behind this idea. Whoa. We didn't rule on the merits. We're not saying that Trump was right. We're not saying that he was wrong. All we're saying is let's just let this thing progress for a few years through the judicial system, and then maybe it'll come to us in a few years. Oh, really? You think those people in South Sudan, that they're going to come back in a few years after they go to South Sudan? And the next wave of people who Trump sends, you think that they're going to be able to do these things? You know, and there's other cases too, like the Supreme Court's been doing this as Donald Trump's been firing people without cause who are on the various independent agencies. And what they're saying is, hey, the status quo is we're on the board. Let's keep us on the board. And then we can litigate our case. And then we can see if Trump is right or we're right. But then the Supreme Court steps in and goes, no. The status quo is Trump fired you. So now that you're fired, you'll be fired for the next few years. Go litigate your case and come back to me in 2029 or 2030, and then we'll deal with it. Do you see what I'm saying? How cowardly that, and then Popok and I and legal scholars, we can't even look to see, oh, it looks like the Supreme Court's having this type of test, or, oh, they were strict constructionists, or, oh, I see how they view that statute. No, they're not. They're not giving us any of that data.
Welcome back. We sit at the intersection of law and politics so that you don't have to. Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on the Midas Touch Network. It is one of the leading podcasts. I'm not just blowing sunshine or blowing my own horn. That is a testament to our audience, the fervence, how fervent they support our podcast and have from the beginning. We've now grown it to the top 22 in all podcasts in the United States on YouTube. We're regularly in the top 50 on Apple Podcasts. And we really appreciate it. To continue to support the show, we need to grow more and organically. Download the Legal AF podcast. Watch the Legal AF podcast. Leave reviews, 5-star reviews for the Legal AF podcast. Come over to the Legal AF YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button. This is all for free. Nothing's behind a paywall here at all. And then we got Legal AF, the Substack, where we are posting everything we talk about on Legal AF so you can read it for yourself. So until my next report, I'm Michael Popok. I'm Michael Popok, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touch's Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popok Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popok Firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popok Firm today at 1-877-POPOK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopokfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popok Firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.